An old friend returns to the Jets, and it will have major implications on which candidates get an interview for the team's open GM job. Let's discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, November 26th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, major news for the New York Jets yesterday. The team announced that it is retaining the services of Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman to help conduct its general manager and head coaching searches. The Jets, of course, are searching for a new general manager after firing Joe Douglas last week and searching for a new head coach after firing Robert Saleh back in October. And Tannenbaum's probably a familiar name to Jets fans. He was the team's general manager from 2006 through 2012. Spielman was the Vikings general manager for a decade. Both of them work with an organization called the 33rd Team. If you're not familiar with it, the 33rd Team is a website. It employs a number of former executives in the NFL, former coaches, former players. It's produced a lot of content, a lot of analytical articles over the last couple of years, also a lot of advanced statistics. Well, the 33rd Team is now entering the ranks of consultants for teams searching for new general managers and head coaches. The Jets are their first client. I think there are some pros to this move. I think, number one, the people running the Jets have no idea what they're doing. After owning the team for 2.5 decades, I don't think Woody Johnson knows the first thing about conducting a general manager search. I don't think he knows what qualities make a good GM. I don't think he understands how to build a winning culture. And while consultants who help you conduct these searches can only help so much, I think that it's good to have a voice in the room or multiple voices in the room other than the usual suspects. And the usual suspects are Woody Johnson, his brother Chris Johnson, the team president Jaime Eli, Ira Axelrad, who's Woody Johnson's business partner or lawyer, who always seems to be involved in these big decisions, even though he doesn't have a role with the team. And we see what this brain trust has gotten us through the years. I think just having any voices who aren't these people cannot be a negative thing. And it was going to be essential because, again, these guys don't really know what they're doing. So I don't know how much they can help, but certainly I don't think it can hurt having people who aren't the normal suspects in the room. And there were also rumors about yesterday, before this news was announced, there were some rumors that some former players wanted to get involved with the search. And look, it's not clear how much a former GM is going to be able to help you out, but I still would trust a former GM over a former player because GMs have at least done the job in the past, so they at least have some broad sense of what it takes to be successful in the role. Whereas I don't think a player really has any sense of what being a good GM is. So if we have to choose between a council of former players and a couple former GMs, I choose former GMs, and we had to have somebody. Another thing that I think will benefit the Jets here is that Tannenbaum has a lot of experience working in this organization, and this is behind the scenes. Let's call it a unique atmosphere. It is an organization that functions or doesn't function unlike any other. And Tannenbaum at least, understands the way the ownership operates. He understands the inside politics. He understands the inside baseball, and he understands how to work around that. And during his tenure as general manager, he frequently was able to thrive. He was able to get his way. I think that anybody entering here without Jets experience is going to be a little bit lost because the Jets don't operate like any other team. If you come in and you've only experienced normal NFL operations, you're probably going to be a little bit lost as to what the Jets are doing. So the fact you have a guy in Tannenbaum who at least has some experience here working with these guys, I think that's another benefit. What are the drawbacks? Well, while I would rather have former general managers than former players be part of the search, and while I know the Jets have to hire somebody, it's not really clear that Mike Tannenbaum or Rick Spielman know how to hire a good general manager. The difference between doing a job and being able to identify somebody who's going to be good at a job, those are two very different things. back in 2015, the Jets brought in Charlie Casserly and Ron Wolf. And, say what you will about those guys. Casserly was an executive for a Super Bowl winning team in Washington. Ron Wolf is in the Hall of Fame. And we ended up with Mike Maccagnan. Again, those were two very distinguished executives. And they ended up giving us Mike Maccagnan. So I think it's fair to say that the understanding how to do the job sometimes is different from understanding someone who would be good for the role. And sometimes you do run into the trap of, I think this happened with Casserly, of elevating your own proteges. So that, that's obviously something to watch and something to be careful of. Again, with the Jets, you're always going to have an imperfect situation, because in an ideal role, you'd have an owner who would understand how to run one of these searches. You'd have an owner who would understand what it takes to be a good GM, but that's not what we have here. We had to deal with imperfect options. And while this might be the best outcome of all the imperfect options, it's still an imperfect option for that reason. Other negatives, well, again, going back to what I said, these guys have owned the team for 25 years and they still have no idea what they're doing. And that's just an ownership thing. And that's something the Jets are going to work around. And that's one of the reasons I'm not particularly hopeful about the Jets' future, because, they fired the bad head coach. They fired the mediocre general manager. They're going to change players again, but ownership's the one constant with this team. And even if you hire the right guy, you need to understand how to nurture that guy. You need to understand how to support that guy. That's something the Jets have shown no ability to do, but we can't worry about that right now. The job in front of the Jets is to hire a good general manager, and they need help with it. So Tannenbaum and Spielman are coming in to help. So I think there are also some unknowns here. One of the unknowns, and this is something I wonder, and I'm throwing it out there, I'm not saying that this will happen, but will Mike Tannenbaum pull the old move where, you're in charge of the search to find the best candidate and you realize the best candidate is you? Because Mike Tannenbaum's kind of suggested at points that, he'd like to come back to the NFL. And we know that Mike Tannenbaum's not exactly a guy who's in hot demand right now across the league. Not only was he fired by the Jets rather unceremoniously after the 2012 season, he went to Miami. He was with the Dolphins for 4 years. They were ultimately pretty unsuccessful. So this might be, if you're Tannenbaum, the question is this your path back in? Because there is a segment of the fan base that has nostalgia for the Rex Ryan years when Tannenbaum was the general manager. So I'm maybe being a little provocative right now, but I wonder, is Tannenbaum going to end up suggesting himself? We'll wait and see on that. I don't know. I don't know that he's going to do that, but I'm not going to lie. The thought crossed my mind. Another aspect of this is just, I think the Johnsons love hiring consultants, because what do the Johnsons love doing more than anything else? They love blaming other people when things go wrong. The consultants are very easy to blame. Jets always hire consultants with these searches. In 2013, they hired the executive search firm Korn Ferry when they hired John Idzik. You think Woody Johnson's taking the blame for hiring John Idzik? No, he's blaming the search firm. We talked about in 2015, Casserly and Wolf. They ended up with Mike Maccagnan. Again, Woody Johnson's not going to take the blame for that. You think Woody Johnson's ever going to take responsibility for his decisions when there's a scapegoat sitting there? In 2019, Chris Johnson was here, and Adam Gase ran the search, which, that was a brilliant move. So I think you're always beyond the necessity, because the Johnsons don't know what they're doing. The Johnsons always want to have someone to blame. It's always nice to have someone in their back pocket they can blame, because how can you blame us? We just did what the consultants told us to do. So I think that also went into this hiring. But Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman are now helping the Jets with their search. You hope it goes well. And I think in searches like this, it's always difficult to tell who the quality general manager candidates are. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about why that is. It's actually more difficult to identify good general manager candidates than it is good head coaching candidates. And that's why it's going to be tough to have a firm opinion on many people who interview for this job. And we'll go into detail on that as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Skylight Frame. Do you want to celebrate with and stay connected with people who are far away? Are you missing someone this holiday season and want them to be part of your festivities from afar? Do your loved ones live far away, but do you wish they could be close to you? Well, we've got the perfect gift for you. Skylight Frame is the touch-screen digital photo frame your whole family will love. Upload thousands of photos with your phone and watch them appear in seconds. It's easy to use. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. There's seamless sharing. Invite friends and family to easily share photos via the free Skylight mobile app or email. No account or subscription required. It's beautiful in your home. Photos are displayed in HD resolution, and you can choose from 5 different frame styles. Set it up in portrait or landscape mode. And now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/NFL. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/NFL. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/NFL. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. The Jets are home underdogs this weekend as they host the Seattle Seahawks. Jets have inexplicably been favored in game after game this year. Well, the odds makers have finally figured it out that the Jets are not a very good football team. Seattle, a 1.5-point road favorite. If you think the Jets will win, FanDuel is the place to get it in on the action. Again, it's FanDuel.com. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. A big development on the Jets search for a new general manager and a new head coach yesterday as the team retains the services of former general manager Mike Tannenbaum and former NFL GM Rick Spielman. And the Jets announced that they are beginning their GM search. It sounds like they're going to search for a GM before they search for a head coach, which is a pretty logical order of events. So who are the great GM candidates for the Jets? Well, I think the first place you have to look are the Tannenbaum and Spielman trees. Got people who have worked with them before, because the NFL is a league about relationships. It's a league at its best where relationships can lead you to a good candidate. At worst, it's a league where nepotism rules. But it's difficult to say who the good candidates are for a general manager job. It's tough to do it for a head coach. It's even more difficult for a GM job. And there's a reason for that. GM jobs, the GM candidates don't really have a resume of work. A first-time head coach, you can at least look at something tangible he's done. If he was an offensive coordinator, you can look at how his offenses performed. If he was a defensive coordinator, you can look at how his defenses have performed. If he was a position coach, you can at least look at the players he coached and see how they developed at his position. And these are not perfect ways to judge these guys, because the head coaching job is different. And obviously there's a lot of context that goes into things. How much control did you have over the offense? Did you work with if you're an offensive coordinator, did you work with a head coach who called the plays? How much talent did you have to deal with? If you didn't have a very good team, your rankings aren't going to look very good. There's a lot that goes into it. If you're a position coach, were you given guys who could actually develop? Sometimes you just get handed guys who aren't very talented. But there's at least something you can look at. There's something we can make a judgment on as to the caliber of your work. And of course, the head coaching job is different from an assistant coaching job. But again, there's at least something tangible you can look to. There's nothing really tangible you can look at with a GM candidate, because these are guys who come from the front office. And ultimately, there's one decision maker in each NFL front office. And that's the guy who is the GM, or whatever title he has, the executive of football operations. If you're not that decision maker, we don't really know how good you are, because we don't know if a team made a good decision. You may not be behind it. You may have recommended the opposite. You may not have liked the great player that your team drafted. You may have given a negative scouting report, and the opposite's true. You may have disagreed with single thing your team did over the last couple of years that got you to this point. If your team's bad, maybe you saw the issues that were existing. Maybe you learned that. Maybe you learned from your team how not to do things. It's really tough to say. So at best, we can rely on secondhand accounts. At best, we can rely on conjecture. At best, we can just make educated guesses as to how somebody will perform in a general manager role. And you have to be careful, because, Joe Douglas was a guy who came with nothing but glowing recommendations. As we now know, that was in part due to Douglas knowing the right people to be friends with. I mean, Douglas was very good at promoting himself in the media. Douglas was good at making the right relationships. Was Douglas's actual caliber of work, were his actual abilities to be a GM as good as they were made out to be? I'd say no. And that's a warning sign, that's a danger. So with all that in mind, I did want to kind of go through the Mike Tannenbaum tree, a list of people who have worked with Mike Tannenbaum in the past who logically could get interviews, and offer a few thoughts on some of these candidates. Now, I went through the list of people who've worked with Mike Tannenbaum in the past yesterday. And one name kind of stood out to me that I think would be an interesting hire. Her name is Dawn Aponte. She currently works in the league office. She's the NFL chief administrator of football operations. She worked with the Jets for over a decade, and her time did overlap to an extent with Tannenbaum. She was not here with the Jets when Tannenbaum was the GM, but they both worked in the Jets front office at the same time. And then when Tannenbaum went to Miami during his brief tenure with the Dolphins, Aponte was there as well. Aponte is now working in her second stint in the NFL league office. She interviewed for the Chargers general manager job a year ago. Widely respected in the league. Again, you kind of have to rely on secondhand information. You read these quotes that come in these profiles of GM candidates, but by all accounts, seems like someone who's very respected in the league, somebody who understands the inner workings of the league. I'll tell you why she intrigues me. And it deals with her working in the league office. Because first of all, if you work in the league office, that means that usually means you're very widely respected in the NFL. But I think about the way the NFL is going, and I've talked about this on a number of occasions on the show. I think the job of general manager is changing. In the past, everybody's always wanted the great talent evaluator. Everyone's wanted the super scout because the GM job was really about evaluating players. And I think that's really changing. And I think over the next couple of years, that's going to change radically. And I think it already has begun to change. The first wave of this was, you just have to start managing your salary cap well. Well, now we're bringing in analytics. The NFL's long resistance to analytics seems to be ending. And with that comes player tracking data, sports science, all sorts of things. And the job's becoming bigger than just evaluating talent. The job is about being able to synthesize information, and beyond that, build a great team around you, because the NFL front offices are going to be creating department after department now. You're going to see things that you never thought would enter NFL player evaluation. You're going to have departments for this, departments for that. It means you have to build a great team. And when you work for the NFL, you have access to all 32 teams, which means, first of all, you have connections all across the league. So if you get hired by a team and you want to build, you want to build a good front office, you can go. You probably have connections with all 32 teams. You have like a great pool of talent at your disposal because they're people you know. And beyond that, when you're working the league office, you're able to observe all 32 teams. You're able to see what works, what doesn't. You're able to look at the cutting edge. You're able to figure out what advances teams are making, who the best teams are, how they operate, who the worst teams are, and how they operate. And you've seen this in other sports in New York. Somebody jumping from the league office and taking over a New York team and having success. About 2 decades ago, Rod Thorne jumped from the NBA league office, took over the New Jersey Nets. They went to the NBA Finals twice. Sandy Alderson moving from the league office, working for the New York Mets. They went to the World Series in 2015. So there is, so there is precedent for this. And again, I think anybody who works in the league office is typically somebody who's going to have respect across the league. I don't think you necessarily need to work for a team to be qualified to be a GM, but Dawn Aponte has worked for teams anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. And I think that the Jets should be thinking outside the box here. I think the age of the Joe Douglas type general manager is coming to an end. It requires a different skill set. And again, we're making educated guesses right here as to whom has that skill set, because it's not entirely clear. I mean, it's difficult to say from afar. It's even difficult to say when you're interviewing these folks in person. But I would be intrigued by somebody who's got that experience working in the league office, who's been able to look at and see what the cutting edge teams are doing, and somebody who has access to a pipeline of talent to build a quality front office. I think that for the Jets right now, this is an outside the box hire is what they should be looking to make, because this team's done everything conventionally. This team has never been on the cutting edge of the league. This team has never been a trendsetter. I'd like that to change. And again, I'm taking an educated guess that Dawn Aponte would be a person who could do it. But of the candidates that have ties to Tannenbaum, and it's not a guarantee that the Jets are going to hire somebody with ties to Tannenbaum, but that's the first place I think you look at. To me, Dawn Aponte is the most intriguing of those candidates. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue to look at some of the other candidates that could come into play. We don't have guarantees that any of these people actually will be considered for the job, but there are some other people who've worked with Tannenbaum with the Jets and with Miami who might merit some consideration. We'll talk about some of them as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and the Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. If they have a how to hire a general manager in the NFL course, maybe we should sign the Jets up for that. Well, all of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. The Jets beginning their general manager search by retaining the services of Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman to help them out. Let's talk about some candidates who have ties to Mike Tannenbaum. I couldn't really find a lot of people who have been considered for GM jobs who have great ties to Rick Spielman, so I'm sticking with Tannenbaum today. We may come back to this in the future to find some people who Rick Spielman knows. A guy who could be in the mix who I think would be a candidate to keep an eye on. His name is Brian Gaine. He was the Texans general manager for a year. And I don't know if you remember the whole thing with Jack Easterby, the Texans chaplain who took control of the organization. I'm not making this up. You can look this up. Gaine only lasted for a year because Jack Easterby fired him after a year. Gaine has ties to the Jets organization. He actually began his NFL career as a practice squad wide receiver with the team. He then became a scout. He then moved on to Dallas when Bill Parcells went there. So Gaine's got Parcells ties. He didn't last long enough in Houston to have a good sense for how good he was at the job. And to be honest with you, I mean, I wouldn't be super excited by this hire. You know, as I said, I think I'd like to see the Jets go a little bit further outside the box with their hire. This seems like a kind of a conventional scouting kind of move. So I don't know how wild I'd be about that move, but Tannenbaum and Gaine do clearly have ties. Gaine worked here while Tannenbaum was in the front office. Not he worked here as a scout before Tannenbaum became GM, but they worked in the same front office together. And there have already been some local reporters who have suggested that he's a guy to keep an eye on. JoJo Wooden, the Raiders' senior director of personnel. He worked with the Jets from 1997 through 2012, so he worked with the Jets the same period as Tannenbaum, and he eventually became the assistant director of player personnel under Tannenbaum. He then became the Chargers director of player personnel in 2013. He was promoted to interim general manager last year when the Chargers fired their GM. Now he only held that role for 3 games at the end of the season, so he was kind of like in the Phil Savage role right now. But he and Tannenbaum obviously have a long work history together. Wooden, it's difficult to say how much did he have to do with what the Chargers have done the last decade, because the Chargers have done some good and some bad, and we have no idea like how much Wooden was actually responsible for that. We don't really know how much he was responsible for the successes and failures of Tannenbaum's administration, but a guy to keep an eye on. Somebody who has not huge ties to Tannenbaum, but there was a connection there. Brandon Brown, who's the Giants' assistant general manager, guy who pops up, whenever you read one of these articles about, who front office executives respect in the NFL, Brandon Brown's name is on that list. He began his career in the NFL as an intern with the Jets in their scouting department in Tannenbaum's final season. Now, that was the only year the two of them had any ties. Brown was an intern for 1 year for Tannenbaum, but Tannenbaum was the GM when the Jets brought him on. And he's gone from organization to organization in the league. He's received 5 promotions in the last 8 years. So either the team he works for has promoted him, or he's gotten a higher level job with a different organization. Was a guy, Dan Hatman, who a former NFL front office guy who every year produces a study on general manager candidates. And he speaks with people in the league and he asks them, who do they respect? This is a guy, Brandon Brown, Giants assistant general manager, whose name comes up over and over. He's got a law degree, so he's got a scouting background, but he's got experience outside that. And again, this job is becoming more complex. The general manager job is becoming one where you have more responsibilities. So the question I have is whether Woody Johnson would hire an assistant general manager on an unsuccessful Giants front office? And I don't know that the answer to that is yes, but I think he could be a guy who ends up getting an interview. Again, a guy who's very highly respected in the league. If you look at these articles that again, these things aren't flawless. These things aren't omniscient. Joe Douglas had a lot of people saying anonymously great things about him in 2019, but Brandon Brown could be a guy they look at. And the last guy who's worth a mention, a guy who I think is going to get an interview, a guy who I think faces long odds to get the job, Phil Savage. Tannenbaum began his career with the Cleveland Browns in 1995. Phil Savage was working in the Cleveland front office at that point. Now, did the two of them cross paths? I don't know. But there is a connection there. And Savage obviously is the current Jets interim general manager. Now, my sense is that the Jets probably want to go in a different direction. My sense is that the Jets want a clean break from the past, that they just want to start over. I would be surprised if Savage got the job. But I do think Savage is going to get an interview. Typically, you do interview the interim guy, even if it's just as a courtesy. And you get information. It can be useful because you get information on an internal person's thoughts on what's been going on with the team. Get kind of an insider's perspective on the things that have been going well and the things that have been going not so well. So there is value in interviewing an in-house candidate. Again, I don't think the Jets will go in that direction, but there is a tie there. And if Tannenbaum recommends him, if Spielman recommends him, maybe he's got an outside chance of landing the job. So those are the first couple candidates that I think could be on the Jets' radar. I would expect there to be interviews outside of the Tannenbaum tree, but obviously, in these searches, who matters. And if you have ties to the guy running the search, it can make a big difference. It can get your foot in the door. Of these candidates right now, this is my early take. I could change my mind. I think Dawn Aponte of the candidates I named would be my favorite. I think Brandon Brown would probably be my second favorite. And the other three, are all tied. I don't really feel that great about any of the other three. And I'm not saying these are necessarily my favorite candidates in general. I just think these are my favorite candidates that I can find who have ties to Tannenbaum. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. We're going to try and have our weekly mailbag tomorrow. I mean, every time I say that, the Jets do something crazy on Tuesday, but we're going to try and have our weekly mailbag tomorrow. Send in your questions.